Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the SPSO's Model Complaint Handling Procedure. I'm Alan Stokes, one of the policy leads at SFHA, and we're delighted to have with us Alison Fennick and Colin Wotherspoon from the SPSO, who are going to take us through the session today. If you have any questions as they occur to you, please type these into the question and answer tab on Zoom, and we can address those as we go. So just before I hand you over to Alison and Colin, we're going to conduct a very quick anonymous poll that should be appearing on your screen very shortly. There we go. So we'll give you just a few moments to answer that. Okay, and without further ado, I'll hand you over to Alison and Colin.
Thanks, Alan. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on the revised model complaints handling procedure. Thanks very much for your time today. Once we've just had a quick look at those poll answers, it'll be helpful just to start off to know where we are. Fantastic to see that so 52% that are in the final stages. That's excellent. 7% have already implemented. 39% have started the process, and 2% have not yet started. So that's really encouraging to see those sticks there. Thanks so much for answering that poll. So today we'll be going through each part of the revised procedure, and we'll look at the key changes as we go along. Because the procedure's grown a lot in size, we've divided it up into 4 parts, plus the customer-facing leaflet and implementation guide, just to make it more user-friendly. So we've divided it up, the relevant information, and reordered it. We've grouped it together. We've included more detailed guidance, some new sections as well. And we've also included links directly to SPSO tools and resources online. So if you have any questions as you go through that, as you're implementing the documentation, and there's any questions that you have on the links at all, then do let us know in terms of what documents that they do refer to, because most of the links do take you to our resource page. So do let us know if you have any questions around those. So at this session today, I'll go over the review process that we undertook to look at these revised procedures, and we'll talk through each of the 4 parts of the model complaint handling procedure in turn. And we'll have time for questions after each part as well. So if we move first to looking at the review process, the original procedure, if some of you were around at the time, was published in 2012. So that's some time ago now that the procedure hadn't been reviewed since, and there was obviously time for a refresh of that. So towards the end of 2018, we set about consulting and reviewing the documents. So we sent it live a survey towards the end of 2018, January 2019, just to gather views and comments on the model procedure. And we also set about drafting up the revised procedure. So what we also did was looked at each sector's model complaint handling procedure side by side, because each of the documents were published and implemented at different years down the timeline. We decided we did want to ensure that there was consistency across all sectors. So that was also part of the review process. So around about September 2019, we sent out a draft procedure to get some comments, and we did receive quite a lot of feedback on that, and as a result made some further amendments. And then the procedure itself was published in January last year, which seems like a lifetime ago. And as you know, the implementation date is the 1st of April 2021. So I believe that's 4 weeks on Thursday, if anyone's watching. So what we'll do first of all is just go through what has not changed in the procedure. So there are still 2 stages for handling complaints. The actual process and the timescales all remain the same. So we've still got stage 1, the frontline response. That's for complaints to be handled within 5 working days and they're to be resolved and responded to within that time frame, with the possibility of extending an extra 5 working days. At stage 2, we've still got 2 working days to resolve or close the complaint and provide a written response to that complaint. And there's still a requirement to signpost to the SPSO at the end of stage 2. So the main substance of the complaints handling procedure has not changed. If we now look at what has changed, as I say, we'll go through each part in turn, and we'll start with part 1, which is the introduction and overview of the revised procedure. So if we look at the contents there, we've got the foreword from Chief Executive, the structure of the complaints handling procedure, the overview. You'll also see a new title, Expected Behaviours, which we'll look at in a bit more detail now. And we've also made some changes to maintaining confidentiality and data protection section as well. So around expected behaviours, this is within the theme of making complaints work for everyone, which is a report that the SO published some years ago. And we've amended the language around managing unacceptable behaviour. So it's now called expected behaviours. It's to try to avoid problems emerging in this area. We're encouraging organisations to be clear and upfront with customers about what standards are expected of them. So in the event that unacceptable actions occur, there'll be a clear standard to measure these against and explain why the action is unacceptable. So the text within the model gives you some suggestions about how you might be clear and upfront with customers about what you expect of them when you interact through the complaints process. So you'll see on the right-hand side there, those bullet points will be the types of suggestions about what the standards you'd expect. So for the customers to tell you their key issues of concern and organise any supporting information that they want to provide you about their complaint, working with you to agree the key points of the complaint when investigation is required, and also responding to reasonable requests for information. So these are some suggestions that you might want to set out in terms of your standards and how you expect customers to behave when they make a complaint. So there's still a requirement to have a clear process for managing unacceptable actions or managing difficult behaviour, and you can include a link to this process within this section in the document, just as with the original procedure. Just as an aside, our own policy of unacceptable actions that we use and we apply in certain circumstances at the SPSO is also reviewed. So we're looking at calling this the engagement policy. So again, changing the language there around labelling it as unacceptable actions from the outset. So it's really just setting out a more generalised view of how we expect to engage with people when they interact with our office, but also how we expect them to engage with us. So the idea is that we review that to encourage positive behaviour, ensure that staff are being supported by the policy, and also include guidance on difficult behaviour that's encountered over social media. This is also obviously something we've, in terms of social media and receiving complaints over social media, we'll look at that in more detail later on, but obviously incorporating this is very important considering that a lot more people are engaging over social media these days. So when our own policy is finalised and published on our website, we would encourage you to take a look at that and just think about your own local approach to managing difficult behaviour. It might be something that you're already thinking about reviewing. I know that across different sectors at this current in time, there are quite a lot of instances of difficult behaviour at the moment, which is difficult to deal with at the best of times, but people obviously feeling under pressure, and obviously we're going through a difficult time at the moment, so it might be something that's already on your radar. But I just wanted to let you know in terms of what we're looking at SPSO, our own internal policy will be changing, so keep an eye out for that. If we move on now to maintaining confidentiality and data protection, this section has also been updated in the revised procedure to reflect the General Data Protection Act. And so in terms of the themes of that, the revised procedure talks about being open and transparent as far as possible in how complaints are handled, and to share information with the complainant and any affected staff members, and also to explain why the information is being shared and how the recipient is expected to use the information as well. So this is all set out in the revised procedure. And there's also scope to include a bit more detail on your own local arrangements for data processing, as well as you can give examples of where a response may be limited by confidentiality. For example, if there is a concurrent disciplinary procedure perhaps that's going on at the same time as the complaint, you'll obviously be limited by how much you can share about the response to the complaint in that. So that really takes us to the end of part one. As I say, we've gone over the review process there, as well as just part one of the revised procedure. So I'm happy to take any questions now that people may have just around those themes before we move on to part two.
Any questions for Alison at this point? Say that if there's anything that occurs to you at any point, please just type it into the Q&A and we can address it as we go. There's some questions coming into the chat. Do you have a timescale for your engagement policy?
Thanks very much. I think the work on this unfortunately has been affected by the pandemic. It was something we were hoping to issue earlier on this year. I believe it may be, I think we're in the final stages of it, because I think a draft was being put together towards the end of last year. So it may well be within the first quarter of 21-22. But I wouldn't want to put a cast iron guarantee on that, but just to give you a rough idea of, I think, the timescales we're looking at. I believe kind of by summertime, if not earlier. But I can keep the complaints handling network up to date on that and on our progress with that, if you're a member of that network.
And again, it's a similar question about the unacceptable actions policy, when it will be ready to be published.
Yeah, so that's roughly the timescales there. As I say, I wouldn't want to put a guarantee on it, but I know that we are towards the final stages there. So we have spoken about it at the Housing Complaints Handlers Network, just in terms of how, as I say, we're looking at the title engagement policy, and it's been suggested that title might not work for the housing sector. And so, that's, I think, as I say, the idea is that we move away from labelling the policy as unacceptable actions. We do refer to that in the model procedure. You will see reference to that language and to those titles, but that's because at the time it was published, January last year, we hadn't yet begun our review of our policy. So that's why you'll still see it referred to as that. But as I say, it was just to give you an idea of kind of the approach and the direction we're taking with that.
I think that's all the questions just for now. As I say, if there is any questions occur to you, please use the question and answers tab, and we can get to those as we go.
Perfect, thank you. I'll move on to part two of the revised procedure now. So this is entitled When to Use This Procedure. So it covers guidance on identifying what is a complaint, handling complex and unusual complaint circumstances, the interaction of complaints with other processes, and what to do if the CHP does not apply. So in terms of just quickly looking at the contents page there of part two, I'll go into more detail about supporting the customer and complaints made via social media, which fall under how complaints can be made. So just where I've got those two arrows there, I'll go into a bit more detail on that just now. But just to also advise that we have included also a time limit for people escalating their complaints from stage 1 to stage 2. This was a comment that came up, I think, in another sector, where there had been some delays for people raising their complaints at stage 2, where they had been unhappy with their response to stage 1. So there's now a time limit for someone to escalate to stage 2 within 2 months of receiving their stage 1 response. So it's just to let you know that further detail is in there. And under particular circumstances, you'll see quite a lot of different subsections in there. As I say, there's more detailed guidance around third-party complaints about contracted services, and things around that. So I'll move on to looking specifically at supporting the customer. So as I say, basically what we've done is revised the procedure to ensure that organisations will now need to specify that how they meet their duties to make their complaint service accessible to relevant groups under equalities and mental health legislation. So they should be able to specify how they make their complaints service accessible to vulnerable customers, thinking beyond the groups covered by legislation. So for example, how do you ensure your complaint service is accessible to older people, homeless people, those without internet access? In summer last year, we published our own guidance around complainants with vulnerabilities. So that does provide some examples of how we've adjusted our service in particular circumstances. And so in your CHP, as I say, you'll need to specify how you meet these duties. So the text in the model is in italics for you to adapt and amend it. And so you can, as I say, you can find the guidance that we've produced for our own internal policy. You can find that on our website if you wanted to look at what we do and perhaps take some ideas from that. Looking at complaints raised via social media, this comes under how complaints can be made. So when the procedure was first published in 2012, this wasn't included. So we've now come up with joined the times and looked at how complaints can be made and how they can be handled when raised in this method. So there's now a minimum requirement in the procedure for organisations to respond to complaints on official social media channels. So those social media channels that are owned or managed by the Housing Association. That's what we intend there by official social media channels. So your response to the complaint should basically tell the person how they can complain and the support that's available to them. So we're not expecting you to enter into a debate or to answer the response in that public forum. So there isn't any expectation at all that organisations will monitor social media that is not owned or managed by the Housing Association. So if there's any private Facebook groups or YouTube channels that are out there that you're not aware of, there's no expectations that you'd monitor those. If there are some that you do become aware of, you may take the same approach of basically signposting people to your complaints handling procedure. So it may, again, this is a section that you can tailor to your own local arrangements, basically. So it might be that in some exceptional circumstances, staff are empowered to handle simple, straightforward complaints on social media. But again, this wouldn't be an expectation to do so. So the minimum requirement is merely to respond to the complaint and signpost people to the complaints handling procedure and any support that may be required. So any abusive or offensive content that is posted on social media channels should be managed under your unacceptable actions policy or equivalent. So just wanted to highlight that. There's guidance under what is a complaint in part 2, which makes it clear that abuse or unsubstantiated allegations that fall under unacceptable actions policy are not a complaint. So it's just to keep an eye out on those sorts of interactions that come in your way on social media. And that really takes us to the end of the kind of key changes in part 2 of the procedure. So happy to take any questions on those before we go ahead to part 3.
We've got one question on social media. It's just what happens if an organisation doesn't use social media?
Then I think I would still include that section. I believe it does form part of the core text, but within the text, the important thing is to explain perhaps your current situation around that. So although the Housing Association doesn't currently have social media, that may well change in years to come. So just to ensure that you do keep an eye on that, if there are any changes, to make sure you keep your policy up to date, your procedure up to date. But I guess there wouldn't be any further action to be taken if you don't have social media. Then it wouldn't be there wouldn't be a method by which people can make a complaint or something that you need to monitor. But if that does change, then make sure you do keep your procedure up to date.
got a request, I think, for people to share their own internal policies on supporting vulnerable customers. So if anybody is happy to share that with us, we can arrange for that to be forwarded to the delegates here today. Any other questions? Oh, here's one. While offices are still closed, what kind of things are you looking for in terms of making information more accessible to people who maybe are digitally excluded?
That's a really good question. I guess it depends on what interaction you do currently have. You can only do what's possible at the moment, given the restrictions and obviously following government guidance in these particular times. So yeah, I just think it's perhaps thinking outside the box, which I'm sure you've all been doing within the last year, just in terms of accessibility. So for example, if you are already aware of tenants who don't have internet access, it's a case of obviously engaging, regular engagement with them. It's something that you would already do anyway, I imagine, because of the way that you're set up and the engagement procedures that you already have in place within the housing sector. But yeah, I think it's just adapting with the times, which, as I say, I'm sure you've all been doing in any case around that. So yeah, just keeping an eye on those people and making sure that their voices are still being heard.
Ali, I was just going to jump in and add on that. In terms of what we've been doing at SPSO, we're trying to include everybody as well. So our approach is trying to make sure that our service is as accessible as possible to digitally excluded people. So people can still write to us, people can still phone us, that kind of thing. We have our duty staff on our switchboard available. So it's just that. So it's kind of hard to reach out, because most of the outreach stuff is done digitally these days. But we're just making our service as accessible as possible, and I'm sure you guys are doing exactly the same.
Thanks, Colin. So I think I've misinterpreted one of the questions earlier. We were asking for the internal policy on supporting vulnerable customers. I think it was actually the SPSO policy that they were asking for. Wondering if you could share a link to that, Alison.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. I can send that on to you, Alan, to share with delegates afterwards. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alison. Unless there are any other questions. Okey-doke.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to part 3 now. So part 3 is the complaints handling process itself. So it goes over stage 1, stage 2, and signposting to SPSO. And so the first thing we'll look at is resolution as part of the key changes to this revised procedure. So we all know that early resolution is best practice in complaints handling, and it always has been. So we wanted to highlight this in the revised procedure and remind complaint handlers that they can think about resolving a complaint at any stage of the process. So this can happen at stage 1 or stage 2, which is part of the reason why we've renamed frontline resolution to frontline response, just to reflect that resolution can happen also at stage 2. So previously, when you finished considering a complaint, you decided whether it was upheld or not upheld, or whether there's more points of complaint, partially upheld if there is a difference in the different points of complaint and the outcome of those. So upheld is where an organisation agrees with the customer that something has gone wrong. There's been a failing in the standards that are expected of the organisation. Not upheld is when the organisation has not found any failings. So what now is resolved as sitting side by side with those outcome categories. So what I've not included here is partially upheld, but we've now got 4 outcome categories when you close a complaint. So that's upheld, not upheld, resolved, and partially upheld. And with the revised procedure, we've introduced a definition of resolved. So a complaint is resolved when both the organisation and the customer agree what action, if any, will be taken to provide full and final resolution for the customer without making a decision about whether the complaint is upheld or not upheld. So resolved and resolving the complaint close to the point of service is something that's been spoken about really since the Statement of Complaints Handling Principles were published in January 2011. These principles underpin the model complaints handling procedure. So They're the very backbone of of how we handle complaints and effective complaints handling. So it's something that has always been there, but as I say, with this revised procedure, we've introduced a definition of resolving, what that looks like. And as I say, we've also introduced it as an outcome category to sit beside upheld and not upheld. So it's not a subcategory, it sits in its own right. So as I say, it's either upheld or not upheld or resolved or partially upheld, if there's more points of complaint. So looking at this in a little bit more detail, if you decide that a complaint is resolved, there's no requirement for a detailed response. So that's whether you resolve a complaint at stage 1 or you can resolve a complaint at stage 2. There's no requirement for a detailed response, but you still need to record what you've agreed with the customer, what action you've taken, and you still need to signpost the customer to the next stage of the process. So if you resolve a complaint at stage 1, you'll be signposting to stage 2. If you resolve at stage 2, you'll be signposting to the SPSO. So that basically means that if the action that's been agreed doesn't take place, that person has the opportunity to come back and say, look, it's not actually been resolved, you've not taken the action that we agreed. That person has a possibility to then continue through the process and either go straight to stage 2 with that complaint or to the SPSO if it's resolved at stage 2. So it may actually be that you decide to continue looking into the matter once you have agreed a resolution with the customer. So this is in order to fix an underlying problem or for organisational learning purposes. So say, for example, you receive 5 complaints from different customers about a member of staff or contractor that's not turning up to appointments in the last few weeks. So you can resolve these complaints, obviously in agreement with the customer. If they're happy that this resolves it, then you can resolve it by immediately organising new appointments for the customer. But obviously it's clear that there's a pattern of poor service here. So you may decide as a result that you need to investigate the issue, but that would be aside from the complaints. The complaint that would come in and that you would agree a resolution with would be closed down once that response and the resolution has been agreed with the customer. But where you do look into the matter and decide to investigate a bit more fully, that would be out with the complaints handling timescales. So that example basically highlights the importance of being able to record learning. So being able to record learning is something that's important for complaints that are resolved, upheld, and also not upheld. But also in general, any feedback that you receive from customers, if there's any learning, your system should be able to capture this. And in terms of learning from complaints, there is more information. We'll go on to that a bit further on, but there's more information in part 4 of the revised procedure about the minimum standards we'd expect to see where service improvement has been identified. So if we now move on to supporting staff. So this is again within the theme of making complaints work for everyone. And so we're looking at basically supporting staff who are the subject of complaints and providing them with information and updates about the progress of those complaints. So the revised procedure says that organisations must share the relevant parts of the complaint with staff involved, signpost that individual to support information if the complaint is at stage 2, and also keep the staff member up to date about the progress of the complaint, as well as keeping the customer up to date. And also when it comes to sharing the response with that complaint, so once the investigation at stage 2 or the response at stage 1 has been prepared, that response should be shared, or the relevant parts of it should be shared with the staff member, as well as when it's issued to the customer. So this means that staff who are complained about will be kept in the loop and will feel more supported by organisations by keeping up to date with how that's being handled. Another key change, looking at stage 2 of the complaints handling procedure, is agreeing the complaint and the outcome with the person from the outset. So through analysing our casework findings around complaints handling, one of the issues that we identified was failings in fully and accurately responding to complaints and in managing customers' expectations. So to address this issue across all sectors, it's now mandatory to agree the points of complaint and the outcome sought with the customer. So where the points of complaint and the outcome sought are clear, organisations can confirm their understanding of these with the customer when they acknowledge the complaint. So within the 3 working days, that timescale hasn't changed, so there's still a requirement to acknowledge a complaint at 3 working days. And as I say, if the points of complaint and outcome sought are clear, that's where you'd set out in the acknowledgement that that's what will be investigated, those points of complaint, and that's what you understand as the outcome that the person is seeking. So ideally, if there is a need to clarify exactly what points of complaint the person wants to raise with you and what outcome it is that they want to seek, you would have a conversation, ideally by phone or face-to-face, particularly for complex complaints. And simple complaints or simple points of complaints and the outcome sought can be done in writing. So this helps to manage expectations really from the outset at stage 2 and ensures that there's a clear and shared understanding of what is being investigated. So the revised procedure gives more detailed guidance on this, including managing situations where the customer raises an unreasonably large number of complaints to be investigated separately or frames the complaint in an abusive way. So that takes us to the end of the key changes there really in part 3 of the revised procedure. So happy to take any questions at all over those parts that we've gone over today.
Great, thanks, Alison. We've got a good point around for when tenants are digitally included or digitally excluded, I should say. For people who are sending out tenant newsletters, if they're still sending them out at the moment, it could mention the new CHP, and if anyone wants a copy of it, that could then be posted out. So that's maybe one method that can be used in those situations. We've got a question around social media. So if tenants have a chat on a social media page regarding, say, the rent increase or express dissatisfaction, would that constitute a complaint and need to be signposted to the complaints procedure?
I guess first of all, I need to understand if it's on the officially owned social media channel, so the Facebook or the Twitter page, for example, that is actually the official and official channel for the housing association. And if those conversations are come out, I guess it depends really on the circumstances, on what's actually communicated via that channel. But yeah, I mean, it needs to be monitored to ensure whether there is something there that fits the definition of a complaint. So, you know, as we all know, the expression of dissatisfaction by the service or lack of service, lack of action taken by the organisation. So it's really whether it fits that, or whether it's perhaps, you know, the housing association has recently tweeted or posted something about, you know, a new policy or a new decision, or you know, the stair cleaning arrangements or something about that, and then this is chat that has come on following that new policy or decision or arrangement that's being made. And yeah, you'd need to look, I guess, at the context to see, does that fall under you know, definition of a complaint, or is it just a public response to something that you have tweeted or posted about. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I couldn't necessarily say black and white, yes or no. It just, I guess it depends on how it's communicated, and if it falls under the definition of a complaint.
We've got a question around the resolved stage at stage 2. So it's asking, are we saying that stage 2 isn't an investigation stage anymore? Because investigation should surely always reveal an outcome on whether it should be upheld.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think this is covered in the CHP in part 3. it sets out stage 1 is still, the frontline stage, as Ali said, we're calling it now frontline response. Stage 2 is investigation, and it still sets out all the things you would expect from an investigation stage. I think what we're saying is that in terms of resolution, it's probably more than likely that resolution will happen at the initial stages. It's something that you can fix relatively quickly and regard it as resolved. But the CHP allows for resolution to take place at stage 2 where that may be possible. So it may be, for example, that a complaint that's, because in the normal course of events, the complaints process is a linear thing. Complaints will go to stage 1, then to stage 2. But some complaints may come in directly at stage 2 and are appropriate there. But it turns out once you do a very quick review of the complaint, actually this is something that could be resolved rather than being needing a full investigation, or something that could potentially go to mediation, and that could result in a resolution that therefore doesn't require the normal investigation. So we're not saying that stage 2 is not an investigation stage. It absolutely is, and it remains that core investigation stage is set out in the CHP. It's just that the resolved, resolved is a tool for you to use, that it may be that something that's apparently stage 2 complaint can actually be resolved there, but it's more than likely that most resolutions will take place at stage 1.
Thanks, Colin. I think that's all the questions for now.
Great, thank you. I'll move on to part 4. This is just a quick slide on some of the key changes that have been added in there for the governance part of the revised model complaints handling procedure. So in terms of recording complaints, there's new guidance on the best practice of recording the full complaint journey. So where complaints do escalate to SPSO, if you record locally on your complaints handling system, the full complaint journey, so whether that's gone through stage 1, stage 2 with you, or perhaps it's gone straight to stage 2, and then it's escalated to SPSO, we would advise that would be best practice to record locally what happens at the SPSO stage as well, in terms of the decision that we issue, what stage it reaches, what the outcome is. So that would be something, if those complaints do escalate to SPSO, you've got the full journey recorded there. In terms of learning from complaints, as I mentioned before, there's a minimum standard that's required, and there's a number of bullet points in part 4 of the procedure that set out what's expected where the need for service improvement is identified. So, for example, an individual is allocated a task, a deadline is set. In terms of going forward, it's the service improvement that's been identified and the action that's been taken are monitored on an ongoing basis, to ensure that if any issue arises again, that perhaps there's policies and procedures that have been amended to change so that those issues are addressed. As I say, those details are set out under that section in part 4. In terms of standardised recording and reporting, there would be a core set of indicators for all organisations across all sectors. So up to this point, there has really just been formal key performance indicator guidance set out for the local authority and the housing sectors. But what we're looking to do is issue a core set of indicators for all sectors. So this will likely look very similar to what you're already doing. So we'll be looking at complaints received, complaints closed within the 5 and 20 working day timescales, the outcomes at the different stages of complaints, also the learning from complaints, and the average timescales for handling complaints. So those are, I'm sure, the sort of standard key performance indicators that you're looking at in any case. And it's something, as I say, that now we're moving more towards a standardized set of reporting across all sectors for this, so that hopefully you should be able to benchmark in the future with organisations of a similar size within your own sector, but potentially also across sectors using those same, because you're all using exactly the same complaints handling procedure, and you'll all be reporting the same complaint performance information as well. In terms of publicising complaints information on a quarterly basis, there's a requirement to publish the complaints outcomes and actions taken to improve services. So this might just be summarised in a "you said, we did" type publication, or in your own newsletter, you may already include this information. As I say, that's to be done on a quarterly basis. And on an annual basis, there's an expectation that the complaints report will be published on organisations' website that will report against these key performance indicators. So that really covers us for part 4, the governance part of the revised procedure. As I say, there's also what's entitled part 5 on our website under the model complaints handling procedures. So this is the customer facing information. This doesn't look massively different. We've basically just updated it to ensure that it does reflect the changes that have been brought in for the internal document. So basically we do have the timelines there in terms of escalating stage 1 to stage 2. Because the customer facing information sets out that people have 2 months to do so. There's also inclusion there about resolving complaints, yeah, everything really has been updated. As I say, there's not the major changes, obviously what's included in the staff facing internal documents, but just to let you know, obviously the public facing information has also been updated. In terms of adopting the procedure, those of you who are just kind of setting out on this process, the template that we provided on our website is what we'd advise you to use, rather than looking at what procedure you have in place already and trying to include in and incorporate the changes that we've made. The best thing to do would be to start from scratch, as it were, with the templates that are provided on our website. So you can decide to keep the 4 parts separate, or you can include it in one long document. That's up to you. We're not going to be prescriptive about that. But as I say, that would be in terms of how you approach this. When you first start out, the best thing to do would be to download the Word documents that are on our website and use those as a template to adapt and adopt the text. So within, as with the original procedure, there's scope to reflect your organisational structure, operational processes, your corporate style, your identity, the language that you use, obviously your branding, you'll have that on there. But as I say, there's now a standardised core text that's the same across all sectors. So we'd really be looking for you to use the text that's in normal, non-italicised, black coloured text would be the same across all sectors, and we're looking really for that not to be amended. So any text that is in italics can be amended and replaced with your own text. So any suggestions or examples of, we were talking before obviously about expected behaviours and the standards that you might set for those. Also obviously things about meeting the equalities and mental health legislation in terms of the examples that you'll use to meet those duties. Any text that's in turquoise is basically giving instructions or clarification, so that should be deleted basically after you've amended that section of the procedure itself. And that really takes us to the end of the session today. So we've gone through the review process, all 4 parts of the revised procedure. And obviously at the end there we just covered the customer facing and implementation of the procedure as well. So happy to take any questions that have popped into your head along the way, or just specifically around those parts that we've covered there.
Thanks, Alison. We've got a couple of questions. If you can't agree the outcomes for resolution with the complainant, what's the next step?
So it sets out in the procedure that if you can't reach a resolution, you'd just follow the procedure as you normally would. So if you're at stage 1 and you're looking to try to resolve the complaint at stage 1, reach a resolution, reach an agreement, you can't reach that agreement, it would just be a case of following stage 1 as you normally would and giving that response of upheld, not upheld, or partially upheld. Likewise at stage 2, if you can't reach that resolution, you can't reach that agreement with the customer, then you would carry out a thorough and robust investigation as you normally would at stage 2 and respond to each point of complaint and giving that outcome of upheld, not upheld, or partially upheld.
Thanks for that. This is a specific period. They count those that are auto-escalated to stage 2 at day 11 if they miss the 5 days plus extension. So is this something in the KPIs that you, or indeed the SHR, would want to see?
but that would be for the SHR really to respond to what they're looking for. But yes, if a complaint at stage is being handled at stage 1 and you need to extend by 5 working days, and it then moves from day 10 to day 11, if in terms of being compliant with the model complaints handling procedure, that complaint would move automatically to stage 2 at that point. I would hope that these are few and far between. So you should obviously be considering, as you know, this isn't a change from the original procedure from what you've already been doing. When you first consider a complaint that comes in, obviously the important thing is to ensure that you're considering it at the right stage. Is it a simple and straightforward complaint that can be handled at stage 1? Do you perhaps just need to make a couple of inquiries and it's necessary to extend just a wee bit because the person that you need to speak to is on leave or off sick, for example, and it can be resolved within that time frame. But the essential thing is to consider that, you know, if it does look as though you need to do quite a lot of investigation, make further inquiries, read different parts of policies and procedures and documentation, look into exactly what happened, then it might well be suitable to consider straight away at stage 2. So if you do see that this is happening, that there's a pattern of complaints automatically moving to stage 2, after, you know, at day 11, there should be consideration there as to how complaints are looked at when they first come in, and should they be moving straight to stage 2, if some of them are being considered at stage 1. But yeah, in terms of what comes out of your average timescales for responding, that will obviously take your average timescale at stage 1 up. You know, if you're going past the 5 working days, that means you're out with the 5 working day timescale, and it'll push your average timescales up. So yeah, so it's something certainly to monitor, keep an eye on.
Okay, we've got a question. When will the KPIs be circulated?
I hope in the not too distant future. As I say, this is something that we're trying to prepare and for all sectors. So this is a cross-sector document that will apply to all. We're in the final stages of looking at that now. The work unfortunately has been delayed because of the pandemic, but it is something that we're keen to issue. But as I say, in terms of what the indicators are, I imagine it would be quite likely that you're already looking at these in terms of the performance, performance against the complaints, and it's something that you could look at incorporating in your system over the coming year. But as you know, as the revised procedure itself was published last January, and in terms of this new resolved category to build into your complaints recording system, that's something that's that's been out there and publicised since January last year. So organisations should be making good progress in terms of incorporating resolved into their complaints handling systems. But looking at the performance indicators, that's perhaps something you could build into your system over once these are published.
Should the CHP be published in its entirety on the website or just the customer-facing procedures? Similarly, we're seeking committee approval this month. So do you advise taking the whole document to the committee, or perhaps a summary of key changes along with the customer-facing procedures?
So I think that kind of two questions there in terms of what's made public. What we're looking for is the customer-facing information. That's the leaflet that's been published and that you can adapt and put on your website, print out, make available to people, not just when they want to make a complaint, but just ensure that it is visible and accessible at all times. Some organisations do decide to also publish their internal staff-facing documentation. It just may cause some confusion in terms of, what we're looking for is that the complaints information, how to access it, the stages that are involved, the timescales that are involved, what people need to do, what they need to tell you. You want that to be completely, absolutely crystal clear for people. and including further documentation and detailed documentation on your website may well confuse matters or be misleading. So it's up to you, but what we're looking for is that you publish the customer facing information. And in terms of your own approval processes, again, that'll be decided by how things work internally as to whether you give a summary to in terms of going through the approval process, or whether they need to see the full documentation. And that would be, I guess, something to consider as part and parcel of what your usual approval processes are.
Just noting, Ali, there in the part 4 of the MCHP, which is, as you said, it's just on the governance section. In the model version, in paragraph 4 of that, it talks about the responsibility of the management committee, as the governing body with responsibility for overseeing the work of a housing association. And one of its responsibilities is to approve the adoption of the CHP. So yeah, I mean, as Ali says, that could be a summary of key changes. But so it's for yourself to decide what information your management committee needs. But yeah, they certainly do have a role in approving the adoption of the revised CHP.
Thanks for that. So just a point of clarifications about what will be reported. So it'll be upheld, not upheld, and resolved. And so there's questions around what if the complaint is both resolved and upheld.
So as I was explaining, resolved is a category in its own right. So you're not going to have a complaint that's upheld and resolved. It's going to be one or the other. So as I say, there's 4, as the model procedure sets out, there's 4 out categories of upheld, not upheld, resolved, and partially upheld. So there's no subcategories of complaints. If you decide that you need to look into a resolved complaint further because, as we've said, there's a learning opportunity there, there's something you want to look into this pattern, perhaps there's a pattern emerging with a particular contractor, for example, that's something, as I say, that you do away from the complaints handling timescales, and that you need to be able to record and capture on your complaints handling system. So where there is a pattern or where there is learning, you need to be able to capture that. So the important thing would be able to pull where there's learning in complaints. But there's no subcategories. A complaint is either upheld or resolved or not upheld.
Thanks for that. I've got a question. Will the SPSO be providing any individual in-house training to organisations if they requested it?
Not specifically on the revised procedure. So as we've said, the main substance of the procedure hasn't changed, but we've gone over the key changes today. There is also a 10-minute video that goes over these changes on our website, and further kind of additional resources as well. For example, we've spoken about complaints with vulnerabilities that go alongside the changes of the revised procedure. But I know our training coordinator is extremely busy at the moment. So she's rolled out the Stage 2 investigation skills course online. And I think she's fully booked up to mid-May. She's also running regular open courses for complaints handling as well. Again, it's all online now. So if you do have any queries at all about training, then I can pass on our training email address to inquire further about that. But in terms of the key changes to the revised procedure, there's documentation on our website, and our training page will give you details of the training that we currently offer.
And we'll put a link up to the SPSO video on the SFHA events page, along with a recording of this webinar, so that might help as well. Okay, so what's the expectation of consultation with tenants before implementing the revised CHP?
I don't believe there's an expectation on our side with that. That's up to you in your own internal process. What you would usually do? I guess I would follow your usual processes for that, for raising awareness or for consulting on that. That's at your discretion how you approach that.
There's one, it's probably more a point than a question, just around sometimes if you're waiting for information from a third party, it can take longer than 11 days. And I suppose it's how you might address that or record that within the process.
So I get, so that is for a third party in terms of if a third party has submitted a complaint on someone else's behalf, or in terms of internally seeking information about a complaint. I mean, obviously there can be delays at any part in the process.
Yeah, I think it's,
and that.
Sorry, Alice. I think the specific example you're given is Scottish Water. So it's a complaint maybe that's been made that the third party they need to speak to first before they can address the complaint.
Yeah, and it might be if you already know that there may be some delays, and you not only need to speak to them but make other inquiries with other people, or it might be that you consider the complaint immediately at stage 2 at that case, because you know that there will be it will take a bit of investigating or back and forth with Scottish Water. It's one thing making an inquiry, but there might be an ongoing dialogue perhaps with them around the specific complaint that's been raised. So that particular example, perhaps it might be appropriate to handle at stage 2. Obviously, that completely depends on the context and what comes in. But as I say, I would imagine that they'd be few and far between, these complaints that automatically go to stage 2 because they reach day 11. As I say, it's crucial to understand from the outset how much information you need to look at when considering this complaint. Is it really simple and straightforward, or will there be a bit of back and forth and investigating to look into these issues? So yeah, I would just, as I say, perhaps just be aware of, for example, Scottish Water's timescales when you start looking at something, and understand whether it should be handled straight away at stage 2.
I think maybe that addresses the next point as well, because the question was if a simple stage 1 complaint takes much longer than 5 working days due to various factors, should this automatically become stage 2? Yeah,
perhaps it might be that when you, on the face of it, initially something might look simple and straightforward, and then a couple of days in, it turns out not to be. And so it's moved straight away to stage 2. I mean, that's at your own internal discretion at how you handle that. So that, yeah, it would be, included in the timescales. The day 1 is date of receipt, so that should always be taken into account. But yeah, there may well be a case that you need to move to straight to stage 2 after looking into a little bit further.
If a complaint is escalated to stage 2, do you consider this remains as one complaint received? I think there's been some rumours around this counting as 2.
Yeah, so I mean, if someone receives a stage 1 response and is unhappy and would like to escalate their complaint, it's handled at stage 2. So that's the same complaint will be reopened, and that's not changed. That's been the case since when the first model complaints handling procedures were introduced. So yes, it would be one complaint and it would be reopened and moved from stage 1 to stage 2.
Okay. We've got a question about a template being provided. I think, I don't know if it's maybe in addition to the model itself, if there's anything further that might be coming forth.
A template in relation to anything in specific?
Yes, so
specifically, or
maybe needs a bit more expansion on what the template would be. Sorry.
So yeah, I mean, as I say, in terms of the model itself is the template, so that's divided into the 4 parts. And as I say, you can decide whether you choose to keep it separate as 4 individual parts or as one long document. And the templates are ready to be literally lifted and adapted for local use. So the Word documents are available on our website to download and adapt. As I say, there's links to SPSO tools and resources if you have any questions on those, then do let us know. But there are, for example, in part 2, there's a section around what to do where the CHP doesn't apply. And we have an example letter that you could use to issue a response to when a complaint doesn't fall under, that's not going to be looked at under the CHP. So that's sitting on our website. So there are different templates included within different sections within the model, but the model itself is to be used as a template to adapt.
Sorry, the question was from Jane there. She's clarified it was a template for reporting. She was wondering if there would be anything provided.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yes. That I don't think that is something that will be published. As I say, it'll be something around, be around those 5 core indicators. It could be something, as I say, that the network group work on together. It's perhaps organisations already use a template for reporting complaints information. As I say, you'll already be monitoring your complaints performance. So it's a case of working those core set of indicators into what you're already reporting. But it's perhaps a spreadsheet or something that has, that the complaints handler network could look at, sort of putting together something. But I guess it completely depends on your own local complaints system that you use. It might be, that's already incorporated in within the system, that you can, enter the data, and the system then produces a report for you against these indicators. So different organizations will have different needs, I guess, in terms of what kind of reporting templates they need. But we can look at that with the network.
We've got another point of clarification just around the upheld, partially upheld, or not upheld. It's been required to report on how many complaints have been upheld or not upheld, irrespective of resolution. So now we're saying resolved sits alongside the others, and maybe that's going to skew reporting. I was just asking to 100% clarify this, as it's maybe a feeling that maybe contradicts slightly.
I don't think it will. Yeah, I know what you mean. It sounds like it will skew reporting, but I think what it really is we believe it's recording more accurately what you're actually doing. Because we think there is actually a lot of good work out there where people are resolving complaints, but that's maybe not being recorded. So if you've not been recording that activity at all, this gives you a new category to record it. Also, though, as Ali explained, where, given that there's no subcategories, it's upheld, not upheld, or resolved, or partially upheld. Where you're recording things as resolved, yes, that may well change the statistics, because your numbers of upheld or not upheld might change, because some of those are now logged as resolved. But the point is, we're looking for you to just record the activity that actually happens and report that.
Okay, thanks. We've got a point around a validation exercise that was undertaken last year, that an escalated stage 1 complaint should count towards both stage 1 and stage 2 totals. So it's essentially 2 complaints, and the system struggles to count those separately. So it needs to count. If it counts as 1, that would make it much easier. So it's just to confirm that that's the case.
Yes. An escalated complaint is 1 complaint. So where a complaint on your system, you open up a complaint at stage 1, you provide the response at stage 1 and close it down. If that person comes back to you and wants to escalate the complaint to stage 2, then that stage 1 complaint is reopened. So that would be 1 complaint on your system, and you'd follow that journey through from stage 1, stage 2, and as I say, potentially if it reaches SPSO at all, then we'd recommend that is also incorporated into your system, so you can follow the full journey.
Okay. I think we've time just for one more question. So again, it's just to clarify that the SPSO guidance now states the need for board approval for the model, or for the complaints handling procedure. And also just to say that they were under the impression as well that the stage 1 and when it was escalated to stage 2 would count as a separate complaint, and the system was changed to account for that.
Well, I think what Colin read out before, it's all in the implementation guide and part 4 governance of the complaints handling procedure around around any guidance there around the approval process. So that would be the best thing to refer to, as I say, is the implementation guide and part 4. And in terms of looking at escalated complaints, this isn't changed with the revised procedure. There's nothing new on that front. So where a complaint has been escalated, is exactly the same as you've been doing up to now. There's no changes in the revised procedure in relation to that. So an escalated complaint is reopened from stage 1 if they want to go to stage 2, and the timescales recorded accordingly on your system.
Great, thanks. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. But thanks everyone for joining us today. And if any further questions occur to you, please do get in touch, and we can seek to address those. And a big thanks to Alison and Colin for what's been an excellent session today. Just shortly, an evaluation is going to pop up on your screen. So if you could maybe take a wee moment just to fill that out before you head off. And just to say, a recording of the session will be made available on the SFHE website, along with the SPSO video that we mentioned earlier on. So thanks everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.